Hello and welcome to Biz Talk. I am Danish Manzoor and today we come to you from the beautiful city of Stockholm in Sweden. I've been here for past 2 days and this has been a very interesting experience. Moving around in public transport with such great ease, or the way public transportation is managed in this beautiful city has been a great experience for me personally. Now to discuss this issue further, who better than the Regional Minister for Transport himself? I have with me today Mr. Kristoffer Tamsons, and we will discuss about the public transportation and about the mobility issues that the Stockholm city faces and how they've been dealing with it. Welcome to the show, Mr. Tamsons.
Thank you very much.
It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
Right. So usually, on the show, the first questions which we begin with and we ask our guest is usually about the challenges which you face with your domain, right? In this case, being public transport, and today being a time when the world is struggling. All the major cities are struggling with traffic jams, with excessive vehicles, with pollution. What are the challenges that you have been facing with respect to public transport here in Stockholm City?
I would say that we face the same challenges. As you say, congestion, traffic jams, pollution. Also the challenges, I would say, of being a growing city where more citizens are establishing themselves with homes and the need for jobs and so on also creates, of course, a need for journeys, both within the city but also when it comes to the region as a whole. And of course, in that time, I would say it is necessary, I would say it's crucial to see public transport as much of the backbone for the development when it comes to both the city development but also the regional development, both when it comes to issues such as environmental issues, to deal with congestion, but also to deal with the quality of life.
Right. So I've seen, your metro train infrastructure. I've seen how the trams are very well connected and the stations are very well interconnected. But there's an issue which is about the last mile connectivity, then, right? Like, how do you get to the metro station? Most cities are trying to solve the problems with bringing in metro station, tram services, and other mobility solutions, but then not many are really thinking about how do you bring the commuter from their homes to these metro stations or bus stations. What is your solution for that?
That's an old challenge, I would say, if you talk about public transport. And of course, one thing I would say that we have tried to do in the Stockholm region is, of course, to have a joint public transport authority where the metro system, the trams, the commuter trains and the buses are connected in one system. We are planning and having a traffic planning in one system. We have a joint ticketing system and a joint travel planner, journey planner also. But of course that is not and will not be enough. And what we are looking into right now as a last mile solution to fill in the gap between the home and the station, no matter if it's the bus or the train, is, I would say, autonomous vehicles, autonomous buses. And we are trying them out right now in a municipality in the northern parts of Stockholm. And I would say this far with good results. And we hope to see this kind of technology increase in the future and increase as the kind of on-demand services that will fill in that gap that we know exists when we talk about public transport more traditionally.
Right. So talking of profitability, that becomes a very major factor as well. Your revenue is coming in, and then are you profitable or not? Are you able to run the services or not? Most cities across the world end up subsidizing public transport for their people, most governments as well. But then how sustainable is that model, and how do you face that challenge to keep it profitable?
We have, of course, a subsidy because we think that public transport, a modern public transport service, is actually a public service that is needed as a backbone in a city that wants to grow sustainable and that wants to give its citizens a quality of life and give all citizens, I would say, also an equal opportunity to travel and to get from home to work, for instance. But also, of course, we need to take a deeper look when it comes to financial issues, because there is always a greater demand for good public transport than there are means to finance it. So what we have done to get another source of income is, of course, to establish a congestion charge in the region that helps us take money from the ones who has the money to drive a car and who chooses to drive a car and to be able to take that money and invest it in public transport. And other things that we look into is, of course, also what we call a Stockholm model of land value capturing when it comes to, for instance, extending the metro system.
Right. Now, you mentioned about subsidizing and you mentioned about congestion charges, right? The problem with congestion charges, which we have seen globally wherever it has been applied, it hasn't really been a success, and people have started paying more, governments and cities have started making more money out of it, of course, to be utilized for better purposes, but then the congestion doesn't really go down. Has it been a success for you?
We could see in the beginning, of course, there was a opinion against it when we established it, but quite soon I think that people both got used to it and that they could see the benefits of the system. So complaints went down, but also traffic went down. We could see a drop in car traffic with somewhere around 20% when establishing the congestion charge. Of course, that has not been forever. People get used to the system, and with that they tend to, in some ways, go back to old habits. But I would say that we have
So an initial success and then ultimately back to square one.
But not fully, I would say. But we can also see that we have had another development curve when it comes to car traffic.
Right.
So it's developing from a lower level than it would have otherwise. And we can also see that we have had a growth when it comes to public transport and the demand for public transport that is much bigger than it would have been otherwise.
Right.
And of course we have been doing adjustments also with the congestion charge when it comes to when we are charging the car drivers and how we are charging them. Because I think this kind of system needs to evolve over time in order to actually meet what it's supposed to meet when it comes to battling congestion and making people do the right choices when it comes to environmentally and sustainable choices for traveling.
Let me ask you this way. Congestion charge versus behavior change communication. What do you think is more effective?
I think that there is always a need for both a stick and a carrot. Of course, we as human beings, we are of course always affected by the carrot, mostly I would say.
So, Mr. Minister, now talking about the excessive urbanization at this point of time in the cities that we live in. So all the major cities are extremely congested across the world. Now, is there a need for some satellite cities at this juncture with very well-connected, well-coordinated public transport system so that people don't have to all the time be in the major city hubs?
I think there's always need for regional planning and city planning when it comes to developing our cities. But in the same time, I think it's very hard to and very difficult to stir in which way that our fast-growing cities will grow, because it will always be what people want, where they want to live, where they want to work, how they want to travel, that in the long term will affect how our city grows and in which way it grows. But still, in the same time, I think also that you have right in the question that we also need to, of course, decrease the trends that we might see in the course of our metropolitan areas when it comes to how and in which way that traffic and people might affect the environment there to the worse. And finally, I would say also that, of course, there is also a need to look when it comes to public transport not only to the core of the city. You need to establish good routes, good lines when it comes to public transport, and a good possibility to use it also outside the city core. I would say, in a regional context, it must be easy and it must be possible to use public transport.
Splendid. Women in public transport, like we've been talking about earlier as well, do you think like globally the numbers stand at 14% at this point of time, the number of women in public transport? So how do you address it, and how should the world ideally be addressing it?
I think one question about that is, of course, where the leadership is about. And from my point of view, it has been very important to, for instance, recruit a CEO that is a woman for the Stockholm Public Transport Authority, and also to attract women when it comes to leading positions in public transport. Because by that, I think that you will set a new standard when it comes to leadership, and that will affect also how the organization as a whole works and how it develops. And besides that, also I think that bringing in new issues concerning public transport is also of importance, to make clear for people that public transport is not only about rolling stock and about tracks and about signaling systems, but about how we formulate our vision for society, how we will formulate the possibility for people to travel, to live good lives, and to for our cities to develop in a green and a sustainable way. If you bring that kind of new aspects in when it comes to why we have public transport, how we work with it, I think that you will attract people and groups of people that historically has not seen that public transport is something for them.
Now, lastly, Mr. Minister, I'll ask you about the developing nations. They're battling very badly at this point with traffic congestion and somewhat major issues with public transport. So if you were, out of your experience and learning so far, recommend or suggest, let's just say, that what are the points that developing nations should consider while working on their public transport strategy?
That is a tricky question.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's no one size fits all here, but of course I think there are some principles and some knowledges perhaps to bring with you in that kind of work. One is, I think that you should from the beginning try to create a joint public transport authority for the whole region, not have just one for the city and one for the surrounding region, or one for every municipality in the region. You need to work in order to keep the system together when it comes to how you plan the traffic and how you operate the traffic, how you, for instance, establishes ticketing systems so that the system is something that holds together and is easy to use for everyone in the whole region. I think that is one important thing. Another important thing or lesson I would say from my point of view is the idea that you are not strong if you work with these issues alone. You will need impact and you will need knowledge also from others. And in that sense, I would say that public procurement is very important, to bring in private operators, innovators and entrepreneurs, and take help from them when it comes to how you develop the traffic and how you operate the traffic. Besides that, I would say also that it is important to understand that if the main political or public purpose when it comes to working with traffic planning, this might be, of course, the basic infrastructure, and besides that, the traditional public transport system. You need, besides that, to open up when it comes to mobility solutions, car rental systems, bike rental systems, and other kinds of more mobility solutions that will create something more out of public transport. And for that, you need to open up much more when how and in which way I think that you deal with these kind of issues. And finally, I think that you need to put good patterns when it comes to how we take care and how we live our lives in our cities. And by that I mean that you need, of course, to try to encourage people to do the right solutions. That you can do that by, for instance, a congestion charge. That means that you stir people from riding their cars to using public transport, and also by that lowering congestion, but also getting the money to finance public transport. And you can, of course, also do that by addressing and having a discussion about how should we take care of the city that we all live in order to put good behavior as a basic standard of being a citizen in our cities.
Absolutely. Those were some really wonderful insights from you, Mr. Minister. Thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you.
So that was all from this beautiful city of Stockholm, and we will see you again very soon. Until then, take good care of yourselves.